the Luminous Possibilities Podcast. We offer a diversity of perspectives from many fields of medicine, esoteric and ancient wisdom, and subtle energy, arts, and sciences. Find deeply fulfilling pathways for co-creating yourself, life, and human communities around you. Find inspiring attunements to your own optimal living roadmap, true authentic self, and the most radiant frequency for living life to the fullest. Hi, you two. Welcome to another episode of Luminous Possibilities Podcast. I'm here with Tanya and Karen, and these two beautiful souls came into my life maybe about a month ago, just from a community scenario that we were part of, and Karen and I got talking, and she's doing some amazing work in the world. So, hi, you two.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
You're welcome. So, who wants to start? It's interesting talking to two people here today. The work that you're doing is beautiful. How would you like to introduce that?
Karen, you want to start?
Yeah, so Tanya and I, this past summer, we started a business called the Soul Sisters. And really the essence of this business is like the prefix means again. So it's coming back to your soul again, this part of us that's our deepest essence, the core of who we are. And we're really passionate about the sister part as well, because it's like a space that we want to invite people into that's community oriented, because we really do believe that transformation and healing and growth that we all want to experience in this human life, it happens in community, and like that's just this organic ground for that to happen. So hence why we're called the Soul Sisters. And we do several different specific offerings. We have a women's circle going currently in Leadville, is where we're based out of, Colorado. And then we do workshops, retreats, and we work with people, and we call it 2 with 1. So you get both of us when you come and work and do your personal, deeper inner work.
That's amazing. And, doing personal, deeper work with one person is fantastic, but to have another, being there, it provides a whole nother container. And so, yeah, it's really, you're kind of in some way setting a new paradigm for what it is to do deeper soul work. Mm-hmm. So that's lovely. And Tanya, how about you? How do you see the work that you're doing in the world?
Well, what I love about the way Karen and I have come together is that we've fallen in love with our own authentic way of being and living, and it's really directed how we're showing up in this world. And so we've taken the things that we love about our backgrounds. We both have backgrounds in wilderness and education and healing modalities, and we're being able to bring it together in this really beautiful way of collaborating together. And then seeing that, as Karen mentioned, flourishing comes in the company of others. So we're actually discovering who we are and what we're about, and then putting that into action. So seeing how our souls show up and putting that into action. And we're doing that by exploring a model that is based on the self, looking at selves and how our self develops from our genetics. So we tie in a bit of science here. And nice. Then in looking at the science of who we are, we're recognizing our own uniqueness in this world, and that the experiences that we have in our life, we are attracted to and connect with. So we have our genetics, and then we attract and we connect to an experience, and ultimately that starts to make up the fabric of who we are. And so Karen and I, we get to explore that for ourselves and our own uniqueness. And then we also get to come together and support others in discovering that uniqueness for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, when you're doing work in the world such as that, it's you have your own like enjoyment in your own personal world of doing it as well, and it's just becomes so much of the same thing. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And so today, I think we're going to really talk about, what is it like to live a life where we're in touch with our soul, and what is it like to live where the soul is in more of the driving seat and perhaps directing more of our life activities and who we connect to. I would imagine that, a lot of people are in touch with their soul and may not know it. And a lot of people might be in touch with their soul and then they do know it, and they're being more active with that. For those listeners out there kind of tuning in and interested in what it's like to live a soul directed life, what might be the first thing that comes to mind for you both?
Well, I can
love that
think,
question.
yeah, I can think of maybe specifically about where we live, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
environment.
the question always is well, what is soul? And for us, it's our life essence. It's our authenticity. It's our way of showing up that feels true to our deepest nature. And so an example I feel that for both of us is
Mhm.
that we live in a high mountain community that's full of natural wonders, and it's a small community based here at 10,200 feet. So we've got a lot of fresh air that we get to breathe in. And I think that living authentically for us is putting ourselves in the environment where we really flourish. It's not that Karen and I couldn't live in the city, and we have in certain parts of our life, but we know that we really bring out our fullest potential in this environment. And so that might be one example of living a soulful life.
Yeah, I love that. I think the first time Karen and I talked, she was talking about that, like how much Leadville, that spot in Colorado you're both in, has been so fundamental to shaping life and what's going on. And environment is so key. It's such a really beautiful place to start, because the way I see a connection to the soul is really what lights us up, like it's that kind of
Mhm.
fire element. And it's like what's inspiring and like what like lights you up and gets you going. And if you got all this stuff to do outside, I mean, that's amazing. um yeah, so what about you, Karen?
I this question I'm glad we have time to chat about it, because soul is, it feels like elusive. Recently we did a workshop with women down in Boulder, Denver, and I mentioned Disney. Like Disney just put out a movie called Soul. And so it's like also this word is in our pop culture, and like people are really like exploring what does this word actually mean to us. And I think for me, my personal story of like really connecting to that part of who I am has been like such a deep journey and a deep just shaping where I'm at today. And what I think really passionate about with people that are, I think going back to your question, like what is soul, and um, like how do we explore what does that actually mean to follow your soul. For me, that's involved a lot of deconditioning. So whether that
Mm.
be from my like environment I grew up in and the culture I grew up in, and just feeling like something was off when I was growing up, and it was a very conservative environment, and I just had this deep connection to spirit from like a really young age, and I wanted to go explore and like check out Buddhism and go deep into Christianity and the mystics, and I didn't
Mm.
really have room to do that. And I think one place, I mean, there's so many places you could start with soul, but one place is like in your life, where are you feeling this like friction of like these things outside of me don't match? And like that's a good indicator of like something feels off. And so it's like a check engine light. Like the light goes on and you're like, okay, something's off. I don't know what it is. And oftentimes I feel like that's your soul being like, hello, hello. Like maybe you need to literally move locations, or maybe your job's like not what you feel passionate about, or maybe the spirituality that you grew up in is not, it feels stifling. And
Mm.
so that's like this, well, it's kind of like the hero's journey. Like something's off and you set off on this journey and of trust and surrender and mystery. And you're like, okay, let's go discover it. And that's also something I love is like people that Tanya and I have worked with, they like feel their soul, but they don't totally know where their soul's trying to direct them. And that's like actually, I think, really wonderful, because then that like sets you off on the journey of like, okay, what is my soul trying to say, and how do I like really connect with that part of me, even if it feels mysterious?
Beautifully said. Yeah, I think we can tend to label like good and bad. Like if something's off in our life, then oh crap, like what do I do now? And it becomes a problem. But it's
Yeah.
really like a relationship to how we listen more deeply to what's there,
Hmm.
and what the deeper part of ourselves really want to say, and where we want to be and what we want to do. And there's something that we long for, and I think it's this being. We are beings, we're human beings, right? And we belong somewhere, and we belong for something, and we're it's like our I feel like it's a voice to our becoming. It's like what we're becoming and how we want to become that person living in the future. But yeah, it's that movie. It's true. People are connecting to it. It's like where more of the mainstream is wanting to know, like, wait, what is the soul? Like,
Hmm.
and I guess the way I understand soul, I think it comes from, um, well, I think about the word anima and animus, and
Hmm.
those kind of like divine aspects of masculine and feminine. But it's, yeah, to me, I think, there's this beautiful internal world, and then there's this external world, and we want to see where we belong. And sometimes that image is an external view. It's a scene, like what our life looks like, and it's a job, and it's a relationship, and there's so much to discover on the inside. So when people kind of come to you both, and they're looking for a deeper connection to that, where do you first direct them? I guess it really just depends on, what they're coming in with, right? And
Yeah.
so this is a huge, huge, it depends.
Yeah.
Maybe we can
I
talk
just,
about, yeah, go ahead.
well, I could mention this. Um, I don't know if you've heard of the book Untamed. Did you hear about that book?
No.
It came out this year by Glennon Doyle. It's like on the top list. All like it's just been a very popular book, and
Mm-hmm.
I personally loved it. Passed it to Tanya, and then Tanya passed it, and ended up going through like 8 of our friends within like 1 month. Like people are just devouring it,
Mm.
and like part of me, I feel like it's because it's this hunger. Like to me, I mean, all of us could like resonate with that book in different ways, but to me, like the universal desire that's coming up with that book of why people love it so much is like giving permission to listen to this like inner place, like this inner voice that sometimes or oftentimes we just ignore. And so like I would say universal principle if people come to us is like taking the time to listen inward again, and like not only listen inward, that's one part of it, but another part is like to trust that voice and like know it's good. And like we had one woman tell us like she grew up in a really religious household, and she was like, wow, it's like really freeing to think about soul as something to listen to and honor instead of save. And like that really
Mm.
hit me deeply because of my personal background, but like having people just connect with that part of them, and like another woman just trusting her soul again has been foundational for her healing journey and where she's wanting to go. And so maybe that's one place to start is like, what is your relationship with your soul? Like, what does that look like for you?
Mm. Yeah. Do you have a dialogue? And I think about soul context, because a lot of what I help people through is seeing that there is this soul context. And so what that soul context is depends on how you shape it, how you create it, and what your relationship to it is. And some of it is just awareness, like knowing, maybe having an awareness for a side of yourself that's voice isn't being heard, or, um, and maybe you need to listen to that a little bit more. But yeah, soul relationship, that kind of listening to the voice of the inner being, and letting that guide us. And I love how you made the distinguishment there. Like that's one part, but trust is another. Like to listen to that is one thing, but to trust it is another too, because then you start making actions and your behavior changes based on whether you're trusting it.
Yeah, I mean, it can really, one example in my own life, like a very personal example is I was actually in seminary for a couple of years down in Denver. That was my city lifetime.
Yeah.
But I just like, I was trying to work on my thesis. I was like 4 classes away from finishing. and like all summer long trying to work on my thesis to like get the degree done. And I just like couldn't do it. Like there's that resistance again. Like something in me was like, no. And I remember I was in a bathroom, like taking a break from like working on it. And I mean, this is another conversation, but I just heard one of my connections to spirit tell me like, you need to quit. This is not your soul path. Like, this is not what you want to be doing or need to be doing. And I literally the next day went and quit. And like, I think when people like get in touch again with their souls, like it, not that it always has to be these big decisions in our lives, but I like that you just named, like, it's scary because you like, it could lead you to make these big decisions that like do have ramifications when you make them.
Yeah, there a few years ago for me, about maybe it's about 3 years now, I was working as a software engineer, and there's part of my soul, I think, that I was listening to at the time of, wow, I really want, like, what are people doing in those buildings up there? Like, I want to be part of this corporate world and like know and like understand what's happening in all the high towers of the city. And so, I went to school and I got trained, and I got this job, and it was one of the biggest towers in the city of Denver. And I had this whole city life, and I did it for, a year and a half. It was really beautiful. It was a nice time. And there was a part of my soul that was like, really? Like, and there's this picture I think about with The Office, and there's people at every desk, and there's a clown at one of the desks, and he's like, oh, I think I made a mistake. And that was my
I love
experience. And I was like, man, I feel out of place here, and that was scary. I was like,
that.
uh-oh, like I've spent the last, 2.5 years, carving out this niche and this job and this like career path. And I have all these other things calling to me. And I had been studying astrology for about 6 years at that point. And so I always knew it was going to be part of my life, and then I would maybe return to coaching at one point. And, what do you do? Because sometimes you listen and you're like, okay, like, I can trust this, right? Like, I know there's a bigger calling, and my heart is longing for something like even better than this, like more expansive. And there is that, I think there's a guiding principle I've used around soul work where I tune into my body and I just ask, like, all right, like, is this true? Like, is this really what my soul wants? And if it's a yes, usually I get this expansive feeling, and I get excitement, and I get a lightness. And then if I'm like, okay, maybe I'll stay in this job and I'll just be here and do the corporate life, and then my shoulders sink and I start to drop and get heavy, and and then can I trust that my body is also giving me feedback? And I think sometimes dis-ease shows up as a way of, communicating to us. It's like the soul and spirit part of us is like sort of saying that through the body, and we might get pain, and we might feel, a little bit off or sad or depressed. And that's not bad. That doesn't need pharmaceuticals. That needs listening and,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe just some space and time and patience to kind of unpack that. Cause that was a huge major life decision for me. So learning about more of your work, I see how you're really guiding people through transitions. And I wonder about that. What does that come up as a common theme for people who show up in your world?
I feel that it does. I mean, we're all going through some level of transition, whether it's our transition in an everyday way that says making choices about what we eat, how we speak,
Yeah, each moment.
right, the time that we're choosing to show up in our life. And that also sort of lends itself to those bigger transformations that occur in our life that are around some of the bigger rites of passage of changing of age or the way that we would relate to people, whether we're in relationship or not in relationship, of intimate partners, or, just all the different life events that might show up that are bigger transformations, but are transitions nonetheless, of sort of accepting what is, and then moving into a different realm of how we address them and how we deal with them. And I feel with all of that what's important to remember is that no matter where we are in the transitions in our life, that our life does matter, and that we are continuing to be a part of this fabric of the planetary process, and something larger than ourselves. And so we're in this continuum of time where why is it important to even have this discussion about the soul and where our life essence is because there's this knowing that I have that says, actually, your life matters, Karen life's matters, our listeners' lives matters, and we may or may not know to what extent we matter to each other. It's enough to say that we do matter. And it's really important that then I take the time to show up as the most beautiful person I can, because I know that I want to contribute lots of love and light and experience, and that also comes with challenges and the other parts of life that I always am wondering, why did this happen to me? It's just recognizing that life, it can sometimes be messy, and going through transitions isn't always very clean. But that having that insight to say that actually our life matters and our souls matter really helps to put me in that perspective of saying, wow, like, this is why we show up to have these conversations. And this is why Karen and I are together to really support people in having these deeper conversations, so that you're not alone. We're having them together, and we're part of something greater when we do have them together.
Yeah, it's so important to not feel like we're alone. I mean, I know I've gone through moments of that and feeling that, and then I'm like, wait, I have all these amazing people around me to just talk and meet and do sessions with and exchange. And it's just so valuable to be able to have another set of eyes and someone supporting you through that. And I love that point. It really hits home, because I think it seems like, as I kind of think back on my own personal experience and then wonder about others, that maybe there's a point where we lose that feeling of I matter through like a job, or maybe a societal conditioned part, like you were saying, soul Karen, you're saying that soul is like the unconditioned self.
Yeah.
And the conditioning that we have can end up feeling like this thing is more important than what we feel is important.
Right.
And there's such a distinguishment there, I think, of values, like what you really value and what you really love, I think points to your soul. And so if you're holding on to other values, whose are they? And I usually, it's pretty clear, if it's a should, you can should all over yourself.
Yeah.
Should your pants and all that, and it gets really messy then. But like when you start dropping the shoulds, and you start, I want, and yeah, it just makes it's a pivotal moment, and then you come back to more of, wait, I do matter.
Yeah, and I feel like in transitions, which I really feel like the only constant in our lives is change. Like nothing's permanent, and that's can be really scary. And also, like when we sit in that space, it can be just really healing, because I feel like transitions to me give us opportunities to continually come back to ourselves, like come back to our souls. And to me, like the feeling I get, like I liked what you mentioned earlier, like being in your body, the feeling I get is just home. Like I feel like I'm back in my home, like in myself, in my essence. And it's just this like cozy and warm and just I'm good. Like I can relax. I'm back like in this space. And so these transitions, whether they're big or small or letting go of anger or healing or working through some problem someone has, like it's this welcoming of like coming back home, coming back to your essence, coming back to the space of love and that you matter. And like when you're in that space, like you're gonna live soul drifted. You're gonna live just like in alignment with who you are.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Tanya, I really appreciate what you're talking about, in our previous conversation about subpersonalities, and wonder if you might go into that, because it's such an interesting aspect of understanding self and soul. And because, it's like if you're consulting soul, you're trying to lean in, like, who am I really? And like understand the inner world. There are so many parts. And so I just love what you're mentioning about like opening this dialogue, to all of them, and seeing that they kind of have their own way of being and their own voice.
Yeah, most definitely. It's a reminder that Karen and I often talk about the bus. I think of a school bus. I don't know why I'm even thinking of a school bus. We've never really identified what kind of bus it is. But to think that we have this bus, and to think about our soul as the bus. The soul is that container that holds the essence of who we are, and the way that we approach identifying our soul's purpose and how to actually move the bus is through recognition of ourself and selves. And so the selves become the wheels, the tires of the bus to move us out into our world, to help us navigate our city or country lives. And when we think of parts, think of subpersonalities. You had mentioned earlier when we were speaking archetypes. Carl Jung developed this concept of archetypes, which seem to be these universal energetic patterns that occur in humanity, in life. And what Karen and I are looking at is these subarchetypes that are actually unique to each individual. And why we say they're unique to each individual is because we believe that we come into this world with a unique set of genetics. And so we have genetics that come from our parents, and we have genetics that come from our ancestry. That's to say that I don't have any African American or Asian blood that's direct descendant right now. I mean, we're potentially all descendant from there if that's what we believe in. But to recognize that, yes, I am a white Caucasian woman that comes from European ancestry. So I have those genetics within me, and I also have the genetics of my mom and my dad. And then there's the mystery, the mystery piece of that genetic code, which is the uniqueness of me when all of those genetics come together. And when the genetics come together, and then I am born, I'm like a snowflake. There's no two snowflakes that are alike in this world. You could think of water molecules and how there's that study of the way that a water molecule looks. They're all unique, all different. And so really recognizing that we have this difference in our genetics then leads us to the predisposition to our environment. And where our parts come about is noticing where our unique genetic code attracts certain types of energies and experiences in our everyday lives, and then how we connect with those experiences. And out there in the traditional psychology world, there's concepts around what are called nature and nurture. So nature is our biology. That's what I'm referring to as our genetic biology. And the nurture part is the environment. And there have been thoughts up until this point that our environment actually shapes who we are. But when we look at how we come into this world uniquely, it only makes sense to me that I am experiencing my environment in a very unique way as well. And so I would have a set of parts a set of selves that are very unique to my genetics and my experiences and the places that I've grown up and the energies that I've connected with. And what's so freeing I feel about that is that I actually have what are known as a population of selves. I have many different aspects of myself. I have a wise woman. I have a wood nymph that absolutely adores being out in nature and connecting with the more than human world. I have a liquid silk that is a caregiver and a nurturer and a woman that shows up to take care of elderly parents. I have a nuts and bolts that's all about logistics and organization. And so all of these different pieces of myself help me to drive my soul's purpose and drive my energy out in this world. And so having that knowledge of we were joking earlier about this concept of having multiple personalities, but what a freeing sense of saying, wow, I don't have to be one person. I don't have to show up with you in relationship and be every one. I actually could show up with my lover of life, my wellspring, and say, I am showing up as my wellspring, and this is who she is. She loves life, loves being alive, loves bringing out the energy in others. And what a gift to seeing how that bus gets directed then through that lens, through those perspectives.
I love that. Is it something you want to add to that, Karen?
I mean, I think one part I would add is, like you said earlier, I think one of the most freeing things when we work with people to identify these sub personalities or their genetics is that we really work under this framework that it's not good or bad, it's neutral. And so that just in and of itself is so freeing in so many ways, because people could identify something in them and be like, shoot, like, I don't want to have that part of who I am. Like, for me, I have a part in me that's extremely sensitive. And so much of my life, I've been like, oh, like if I just didn't like take everything in so much, it would be easier. However, it's not a good or bad part of me. Like, the gold comes in place when you learn how to interact with that part of you, and you're just like, it is what it is. What matters is what we do with it and how we interact with that part. And like, a big part of my journey of transformation has come when I learned how to interact with this part of me in a way that really helps support my soul and what my soul wants to do. And I mean, in reality, like what Tanya and I are doing, sensitivity is like a awesome part of me I get to bring to meet with other people, because I feel what they're going through deeply and I can be in it with them. And so that's just one of my favorite parts of kind of the work we do, is that it takes away that shame of like, it's okay. Like, we all are humans and we're all living this experience and we're all unique in our own ways, and it's good. Like, well, not good or bad, but it just is what it is. And that's what matters.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it gives, not only is it a great way to build the relationship with ourselves, but it gives Karen and I ways that we can communicate with each other. You know, that actually says she's got some amazing, beautiful parts that I don't have. She is an angel. I don't have an angel. I have a wood nymph. and so when we get to recognize that we have these parts of ourselves, just that ability to communicate from a different place. There's what's the old adage about the camel and the straw on the back, or you know, that you know, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and you expect a different result, that it just, you won't get that different result, you know, that you keep doing it the same way. And by being able to communicate with parts and each parts of ourselves, I can actually have a conversation with some of Karen's parts that might be more receptive to the conversation than other parts. And so I'm not repeating myself to the person I think I'm talking to and not getting the result I want. That
Yeah.
I actually have a way of talking differently about that. And so that we don't sort of break down in our communication. We actually have a better way of communicating and relating to each other. You know.
Yeah, totally. That it's kind of like Einstein's quote about
Yeah,
insanity.
yeah,
Keep doing
yeah,
that same thing, and that's
yeah.
just the picture of insanity. It sounds
Yeah.
like what you're offering is a really unique way of working with, I guess, more in a sane way, through being creative and looking at these different pieces of who we are. And I feel like it can be so complicated because there are so many parts, but it can be so simple when you just relate to one of them.
Mhm.
Mm.
And yeah, I see what you're saying. Like sometimes in communication, that's like, it's almost like we want to talk to a certain part, but then not acknowledging fully that no, this part's present in the other person right now. How can I shift and speak to that part
Mm.
and work through it that way? But yeah, in astrology, it's pretty much, very similar. Carl Jung actually, he kind of was an astrologer at the end of his life. He wrote a
Yeah.
book on astrology, and the planets in the chart really represent, these parts. And then the
Mm.
signs, like where those planets are located in the chart, is kind of like how they express. And then the houses sort of show like what context in your life are those parts showing up. And so there is that kind of other language as well. And there is a universal archetypal language that, I think we all innately understand. And I love how the work you're doing is help people, understand what that language is in their own terms. Because like you had both beautifully, like, shown or expressed different, like the titles of what these parts are. And it's kind
Right.
of fun, like kind of giving them a label. It's like, oh, that's that angry part is like really frustrated, and that's Bob. Like
Yeah.
Bob's out again, or and you can have fun with it.
It's true. It's fun because we don't label them for other people. That's like the beauty of it, is they can decide what they want to name it. And actually, I have a friend that does label different parts of who she is with actual names. And then it brings humor. Honestly, I think that's what I've personally been learning lately too, is just like, we need more humor in this work. Like, it's like, let's have fun with it. Even if we're in like these deep spaces of trauma or grief, like, humor is good. I don't,
Yeah,
that's a
it can get
tangent,
serious.
but yeah, it can just be so serious. It doesn't have to be all the time.
Yeah, I've definitely gone down that road plenty, and it's like, all right,
Yeah.
let's get out of that and be a little more playful here. It's not.
Oh.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean, I love that, because I feel like the work that you're doing is, you're probably, some people come in and they're just like lost and they have a hard time, and there is trauma, and we're going through these things, and to bring that light heart is a huge,
Mm-hmm.
huge element.
It reminds me very much, again, of that astrological process that you were mentioning, where people have their own unique natal chart, the relationship of their birth planets, and then how that shows up today, how that is in relationship to the planets today. And that's most of how our work shows up as well. That our work isn't based on some story that we've perpetuated since we were the age of 5. That actually what we care most about is where our parts are showing up, where our soul is showing up right now, what spirit is alive within us, and how is that actually showing up today. That we don't have to be beholden to some history that we think we've been living, that we get to recognize where we are today, and what's the choice that we're making about how we discover that, and how we utilize that information, how we do bring it about. And I think that for me is really helped too, where it's like, oh, I don't have to be that same person anymore. I have these qualities that I can, and phenomena that I can recognize within myself. Oh, thank goodness today I could be somebody totally different around certain things that are showing up in my life. And so we're not lost in the drama and the trauma of things necessarily. We recognize that, yes, there are challenges, and there potentially are challenges that have come from trends that have occurred in life, whether it's that unconditioning or being in a particular household of behaviors that maybe aren't as supportive that we would want them to be, to recognize where they show up in our mandala and how we choose today to live differently, knowing that information, that we don't have to stay there. So we don't have to be stuck in that.
Yeah, yeah, because the unconditioned pure self, and there's the heart, and there's the soul, and then there's, so what is really conditioning? It makes me wonder, like, what is the conditioned self? And the more I like have another day in my world, I'm like, seeing how it's the mind. It's largely how we perceive and we conceptualize the heart and the soul and the energy that's present. And it's interesting how stories tend to perpetuate the conditioning. And those stories are driven by usually some belief or some perception. And so I find a lot of the work that I do with people is related to that. It's like, okay, like let's go back and look at that perception, that thing that got decided at that moment, that the thing was painful. And I kind of feel like that is trauma. It's like we decided that we're going to not do that and we're going to do this. And because if we do that, then that's going to hurt. And if we can just go in, I feel like trauma can be simply worked through in a way where you just look at why did you perceive it that way, or what was the context, and what else might be true, and how might that change the belief that you're carrying today that's taking you where you are. But I guess I mean, breaking that story, it's interesting. Like there's a part of like being human that we just want to keep telling the story. And even if sometimes I'll have awareness about something and I'm like, all right, like I'm done telling that story. And then I wake up telling the story and I'm like, why am I still telling the story? And that's that patterning, like that, neural physiological wiring that happens as we live in a certain frame of being. And that's, I think, the challenge, where we're like, like, how do we get out of that like wiring? Because sometimes we can have the awareness and the work starts with the awareness. So is there anything that comes to mind for you both around that? Like if someone comes in and has a story and they're just insistent, or maybe you've had a story and it's just showing up again and again, like what do you resource with to kind of like break the story? Like, let's stop doing that.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I'm just thinking of a recent example in my own life. One of our we have a mutual mentor. One of the things that he likes to say is that the brain, the mind is really just this computer. And oftentimes that part of us is like trying to catch up. Like maybe our soul does know what to do. Maybe our different selves and parts are on board and they're ready to make it happen. And then we have this computer that's still replaying these old stories over and over again. And recently I've made I've made a lot of big decisions in my life. I've personally been going through a lot of my own transitions. And I'm a vivid dreamer at night. And I've really been getting into dream work recently, and that's a side story. However, I keep having these dreams about these old stories that my soul has left them behind. And I wake up and I'm so frustrated in the morning because I'm like, why do I keep dreaming about this? I mean, it's been months I've been having these dreams. Then I'll go talk to this one particular mentor and he's like, Karen, it's like your mind is catching up to your soul right now. And it's not anything to be frustrated about. It's the work that needs to be done. And for me personally, it was just happening in my dream world, which I mean, and I'm sure Tanya has more things to say, but like all of us have different ways of negotiating or navigating through that part. Like maybe that's meditation too. And I know that's a place that's helped me like learn to be a witness like not squelch these things that are happening,
Mm.
not ignoring these things that are happening, but witnessing them in loving kindness. And that's been something that has particularly helped me, not to say it would help everyone. I just think it's just been honestly a journey recently as my this computer in me is catching up to these I've made like relationships and moving and job decisions all within the past couple months. And I think my brain was like, whoa, like that's like, wait, we can't process it this fast. And are you sure you're okay making those decisions? And that's not how we've always done it. And so yeah, he's just mentioned like, the work happen. And so like being patient, I think has been a teacher for me as well.
I love all that. That's like, yeah, so helpful. It reminds me of that transformational tension that this was such an important concept that got introduced to me a couple of years ago that was really helpful, because there's that moment where you feel like you're regressing, like you have a breakthrough or an insight and you make a change and you're like, all right, it's happening. And then you go back into like the fearful, what the fuck is going on here? What's happening? What are you doing? And then, so this concept one of my mentors taught me about was that when you have, a transformation or a transition in progress or in motion, you make a decision, and then that the transformational tension sometimes takes you back into the old physiology, that old computer program, like you mentioned. It's kind of exactly what you described, to where it's important to know that that's just part of the process.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty much all I was highlighting, is that, that's a piece of it where we are going to kind of swing back into like, a bit of the past. And then I feel like sometimes when we come into a moment of finding more space to allow for something new and expansive, and maybe there's more love, that old thing can finally release, and maybe we cry, or maybe we get really pissed, or maybe we get terrified, and that there's actually more of a container for you to hold that. Like there's more space to actually process that, whereas before you couldn't, and it was kind of buried. So I think that might be helpful for some people listening and kind of interested in transformation in general, because yeah, I think soul work has so much to do with that. It's just, we're always changing and we're always transforming, and yeah, we just gotta just kind of see like how to resource along the way, and know that things are all right, in order to not feel too lost. I mean, of course we'll always find our way back, but
Yeah. I recognize too in that conversation that from our perspective, there's always the question of, well, who is telling the story, right? Which
oh
part
yeah.
of us is telling the story? And are there new resources or different ways of looking at that story that other parts of us could help ally that aspect that is telling the story? The gratitude that says, hey, thanks for showing up in a particular way at this place in my life, because it really is what I needed at that time in my life. And now would you please step aside or do something different? I have a practical provider that's all about generating income. And I've done a lot of things in my life. I've been a wilderness guide for 20 plus years. I'm jumping into this guiding of the soul. But I also do some bookkeeping work and some other teaching yoga and some other things. And it's always a place of saying, wow, I don't want to be beholden to the economic resiliency of myself by being practical. Because my practical provider will show up and say, Tanya, you can't do that work with Karen because that might not pay the bills right off the bat, or there's that leap of faith, right? If we choose to go from a corporate world to an entrepreneurial one, that will actually have the resources to pay our electric bill. So thinking about my provider and saying, wow, thanks for providing. You've done such an amazing job. Could you now provide support to my wise woman, to the woman that is showing up with you today during this discussion, that says, actually, there's a lot of ways that the soul shows up. And one of my ways is to really support others in this journey, to be with Karen in this journey. Can my provider find a different role? And I think that's also this recognition that provider, I need that provider within myself. I don't want to say goodbye to that provider. I just want to ask my provider to show up a little bit differently and say, thank you. And now would you be willing to support in these other ways? And I think that's also another way of reframing how these stories can show up in our life, to actually have gratitude for what the story is, and then ask who's asking, or who's immersed in the perpetuation of the story.
Yeah.
And then how do we want to actually find that resiliency within our different parts to perhaps change our relationship to the story? And if we don't have that part within us, there then becomes the beauty of partnering with others. I get to go to Karen and say, wow, could you bring that part of you to me, because I don't have it and I really need that. And so that's also the beauty of this work, and why we feel that doing it together and with others and in group settings really is pretty powerful, because we're not relying on any one aspect of ourselves to show up. We actually have the community, and the way that you're building community. Yeah.
The inner community and the outer community.
The inner community. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me back to that bus idea of the kids. Like, it's maybe these parts are all these little kids, and it's like, all right, how about you guys play together for a little while, and maybe the role you're in right now, let's just come over here and play on the playground for a bit, or do something else. And
yeah.
Like
well, it's been such a great conversation with you both. Is there anything else that you would like people to know about your work, and where you come from, or what you're up to right now?
Well, we've decided recently that we want to be bold. And our boldness comes in this concept that we know it takes time to develop this relationship with the soul. And so as much as we hope to work with the two with one model of you coming to us and working together, we also really believe in community. And so our vision for us moving forward is to provide platforms where we have year-long immersions into this work, where we're creating circles of individuals that are willing to commit to being together for a year or more in the journey of all of this. And so that's a dream of ours that we hope you and your listeners are willing to step into, because we know that like similar to this podcast, it's not a one and done, actually, that the conversation goes on, and we feel that we've benefited from really immersing ourselves into this work. So we hope to have lots of fun and lots of play amidst the deeper conversations and in our year-long touch points.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to keep the conversation going and see where you all end up. And I think it's a beautiful part of the work, being able to immerse. It's awesome. So I love that you're doing that.
Yeah.
And I think I would just add that we also, I love soul. I like self, but I am most passionate about spirit. And so that is like a dream of mine, is that this space also becomes a place where people can come and deepen their relationship with spirit, meaning like the greater beyond us, which to me is like this complete essence of love that holds our universe together. And I'm passionate about helping people connect to that love within them and outside of them. And so just holding that in this conversation as well is like, spirit is very much a key point of what we want to do.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we must have connected for a reason then. We must be pretty similar or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sometimes the 3D, when you're really connected to spirit, can feel so heavy, but yeah, fine. If we're just living in the 3D and we don't have that part, then we don't have the lightness,
Mm. Yeah. We
So
could do that maybe next podcast.
yeah,
Here.
totally. I look forward to it. It's been,
Mm.
yeah, great being with you both. And is there anything else that you might want to mention before we wrap things up?
We just hope that you want to find your soul, find your soul again, because we know you have one. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can find all of what we're doing at resoulsisters.com, which is where we have our offerings listed.
Awesome. So if people go to that website, then they'll find you there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both.
Thank you
Hey,
so much.
thank you so
Thank
much. And we look forward to the next conversation.
Yep.
Me too.